Now, the worsening trade tensions have raised heightened concerns about job losses and the competitiveness of South African vehicles in the U.S. market. Head of Policy at the National Association of Automotive Component and Allied Manufacturers, Beth Dealtry, discusses this with us. Thank you so much for your time, Beth. How is the association, along with broader industry, preparing for the effects of higher tariffs come the 1st of August?
Yeah, thanks so much, Tumisang, for having me on this evening's program. So yeah, it's been a key focus for Nearterm and other industry associations really for pretty much the whole year so far. I think the biggest thing that we as associations are working on is supporting the South African government with their negotiations with our US counterparts to try and secure a trade deal for South Africa at large, but certainly one that looks to support the automotive industry. I think we are by far the biggest utilizer outside of minerals in terms of trade with the US. And so it's critical that we do maintain that relationship and try to secure ideally duty-free, but at the very least preferential access into the US market to maintain the automotive industry and prevent job losses. So that's been really our primary focus, is securing a trade deal with the US. Secondary to that is certainly looking at, well, what other strategies do we have in our back pocket to diversify our exports, be it via market or products, to try and reduce, I suppose, a reliance on the US market and find ways to cushion a blow if such an instance arises that we aren't successful in getting a US trade deal.
Let's talk about that diversification, because it has been part and parcel of criticism leveled against South Africa that in current day 2025, we should not be relying on the US as much as we do. So in the motor industry, what avenues are available?
Yeah, look, I think the first thing to note about diversification is I think there's been a lot of conversation about, well, we should surely be looking at alternative markets, and that certainly is a priority. Changing or adapting and developing new supply chains is certainly not an overnight decision. I mean, if you were to look at, and taking it back a step, if you look at the impact from the US tariffs, it's much more immediately felt in terms of actual purchasing of vehicles, because it's an immediate consumer decision, as opposed to a reordering of our direct component exports, which are going into supply chains. Supply chains take a long time to develop and equally a long time to change. So it's not so simple as immediately changing who our export partners are. But certainly, I think there is a big role for trying to diversify our exports. I think one that's been a point of discussion for quite some time is obviously the African market and the implementation of AFCFTA. And that needs to be something that is, I think, pressed with more urgency than ever before, not just from a pure, developing our export market or exports into Africa, but really the industrialization of Africa as a whole. That'll be good for consumer growth and ultimately demand of automotive products. So that's a key focus area. Equally, outside of markets, I think South Africa has always enjoyed strong automotive component exports, particularly within the catalytic converter subsector, obviously on the back of our strong PGM reserves in the country. This we know is a declining commodity, in the sense of catalytic converters are not required within battery electric vehicles. And so we do need to be seriously considering and looking into our products that we're exporting and how do we equally diversify there. A lot of research has already been done there. We've identified key localization opportunities for the export market, specifically linked to new energy vehicles, which I think is an exciting area to be trying to steer the country towards. Now, I guess the research is done. It comes down to implementation and how do we actually unlock those opportunities. Always simpler said than done, but I suppose rest assured a lot of work is going into securing those opportunities.
Absolutely. I'm glad you raised that element towards the latter of your answer, because many would ask how this implementation would take course, especially because changing gears, excuse the pun, is not going to take a day or two or months. It could take a lengthier period of time. And in the short space of a framework, we've already seen the devastating impact of the current tariffs.
Absolutely. Look, I think one needs to recognize that South Africa does not sit in an island by itself when it comes to the automotive industry. We're part of a global sector or global industry, and a large amount of the decisions are made at OEM HQ level or original equipment manufacturer HQ level, and that drives a lot of where we both exporting our components to and our vehicles to. And so there's a lot of different kind of avenues all interplaying within one industry. And so we as South African can do as much as possible to position ourselves as a competitive destination for production. And I think that's the key part, is if we can be competitive, and I think we do have a lot of really globally competitive manufacturers in the country, but if we can really boost our competitiveness in the auto industry, that ultimately comes down to cost and quality, then that puts us in good stead to be strong exporters, be it of vehicles or components, to most places in the world.
Lastly, the near-term outlook, what is it, given that we are, as South Africa, expected to see far more consequences leading up to August and shortly after that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think from a component perspective, we've already seen, not necessarily just tied to America, but we've already seen job losses in the component sector over the past 2 years, over 4,000 of them. It's been an incredibly challenging operating environment with global production reductions taking place. I think the immediate employment impact going forward, it's difficult to forecast. Certainly, if we aren't able to secure a trade deal or some relief from the August deadline, we will see particularly short time in the sector. We're already seeing that with vehicles, as you said at the opening of the segment, being down 82%. We're already seeing that impacting the supply chain from a short time perspective. And certainly if we can't continue our component direct exports into the US market, there will likely be job implications coming from that. That, however, though, I think is a longer term possibility, given obviously, as I said, supply chains take a while to adjust. And ultimately, it comes down to America's ability to meet their own internal demand and build that capability. B, if we or other nations are successful in securing those trade deals. So I think a lot of water to still flow here, but certainly we are bracing ourselves for possible job losses if we do lose that US market.
Thank you so much for your input. Beth Dealtry is with the National Association of Automotive Component and Allied Manufacturers talking to us this afternoon.